I'm Emilie Jansma, the lady with the tootsie rolls and a lot of other fun things in my apartments. I also am known as the person that has 5 desks. I'm 81 years old. My grandparents on my mother's side were from Easton, Pennsylvania, but originally from Germany. And my grandparents on my father's side were mongrels. There was one of everything, mostly English and German. My parents were both born on one side, one born on one side of the Delaware River, one born on the other. My mother was born and raised and lived her whole life in Easton, Pennsylvania, the eastern part of the Lehigh Valley. My father was born and raised across the river in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and I was an only child of older parents. I went to all the Easton regular schools and came to Penn State. In 1969, I met my husband in the Armory at Penn State. Bill retired as a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army. That was his career path. He and I met at Penn State in the Armory. I was an Angel Flight, which is an organization that no longer exists. So I spent a lot of time there. It was an Air Force auxiliary to the cadets. And Bill was the colonel in charge of all of the cadets as a student for the Army ROTC. And at that time, Vietnam was coming. Military students were looked down upon by a good number of people, but they were also appreciated by a good number of people. I, a long time ago, wanted to have 7 dogs, 7 horses, and 7 boys. So it didn't quite turn out like that, but I'm fortunate enough to have 3 children of my own and 3 stepchildren, all adults. I have many grandchildren and 1 great-grandson. Almost everyone lives west of Oklahoma, which is new for me not to have somebody fairly close. They range in age from almost 60 to 41. I just completed a cross-country trip with my daughter, who was moving to Chico, California. We drove across country in an old car with an old dog with dementia. And I came back on Amtrak, fulfilling something on my bucket list. I've lived on 4 continents, was the only place I was ever in a dust storm, and the dog does have dementia. So the barometric pressure changes was driving him nuts. It was an experience. I'm learning a lot intellectually from some of them. I'm learning a little bit technologically from my grandchildren, and they will all tell you I have a lot to learn. That's a comfort of living at Foxdale because we all have the same problems. Well, after 20 years of being a single person again, mother of 3, and by that time, several grandchildren, I met my second husband in 1993 at a meeting. Afterwards, he kiddingly said they would put on my tombstone, "She's off to another meeting," but he went to quite a few also. And then we went to Ag Progress Day for our first date. How exciting. We got married in 1994, and we went and lived in South Africa for 6.5 months. I think the most challenging part of my life, maybe not a specific incident, but the part was when I was raising my children here in State College. My parents and my mother's maiden sisters in Easton all had high needs, and I call that the sandwich generation. You're in the middle and you're being squished on one side by the older people in your family, and the younger people in your family have a high amount of needs. I think part of the challenge is just physically doing every single day. You have to put your feet in front of you, you get up and go and do it, get through that day, and hope that no more crises happen either in junior high and senior high with that group, or that any more of your aging relatives have a need for you because your job requires you to be somewhere tomorrow. So I think probably during that time, I didn't have the time or the money to be me. I had to get through these periods of being responsible for others. Once the kids left, my father died. My mother moved to State College, and she became much younger when she moved to State College than her life as a maiden widow in her hometown. So that was pretty joyous when she lived with me. The most individual, freaky challenge was I didn't have a lot of money, and we had a home in College Heights with the hot water heater that went out. And I did not really have the money to fix it. So the plumber pulled the insides of the hot water heater, and I sat up all night chipping the calcium and the residue off the heater elements so it could be put back in, and we had hot water. I think I would urge my younger self to be a little more patient. I'm a do it, ditch it, or delegate it executive, and I should have eased up a lot on that. Like many people, many friends here and other places, the loss of my driving privileges and my ability to go to the country and do interviews or to go spend a day on the creek will be a real loss for me. And that's one of the things that I'm very careful how I drive and what I do. But I think on a bigger picture, I'm more afraid that I'm not going to have something to do that I can do. I'm afraid that I might not be able to keep my mind busy if I'm physically not able to. And I'm working very hard at living in the moment. I know I'm 80. My father, I'm right at the average between the time my mother and my father each died. So I'm there. Anything I have from here on is a gift. And I also don't want to stress out other people. And if my family's worried about me being worried and stressed, that's going to compound their stress. I'm trying not to be a pain in the neck to the people following me. What stresses me, and I know I'm standing in the way of the world, is how everybody and everything relies on electronics. I will be the last person making a bank deposit with my money and knowing who's signing the receipt. And I will be the last person reading a newspaper. And many other things which were at their height, let's say in the 70s and 80s. I'm going into the electronic age, kicking and screaming. The greatest gift I've received was, in addition to my children, the confidence to do almost anything I wanted to do. My parents never discouraged me. Anything I wanted to do, and I'm still that way. I try a lot of things, not necessarily successfully, but the confidence to try it. I'm somewhat limited right now by physical problems to be able to be as active as I would like to be. So I spend my time right now as docent for the Foxdale Model Railroad 2 afternoons per week. I serve on the research committee. I work with marketing. And my free time, quote, I am compiling a book about the history of the Laurelton Institution of Pennsylvania. After my children were out of the house and I had a little time to devote to myself and a little money, I started taking supplements, doing yoga, working on my own health care so that I can remain able to do things and not be a burden to my children. Well, some days I have to get up and go to PT at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that's not the most pleasurable part of my day. The average day, if I have my choice, I sometimes wake up at 5:30. I read the paper, take a med that I have to take, not in relation with anything else, and go back to bed or sleep in the big chair for 2 to 3 hours of my best sleep. I get up, do some household chores, decide what I'm going to make for myself. And I'm not a cook, but I'm a wonderful chopper. I keep about 7 different salads rotating in my refrigerator. You remember Nixon went, "I am not a crook"? I've told both my husbands I am not a cook. Hard to describe. just the loving care that you get to give your children. Holding my first child, notice I said first, holding my first child immediately after he was born, and then holding my grandson right after he was born. I think a baby right at birth is the most beautiful thing, but I'm very much of an outdoor person, and I have some magnificent sunsets when I'm sitting on my balcony at night looking to the west, whether it's pollution or just the bent of the light at that point, the sunsets. I'm not a dawn person. I don't even know what dawn looks like, but sunsets and anything on the ocean. You asked me about my philosophy, and this isn't my own by any means. I read this somewhere fairly recently, let's say within the last 2 to 3 years, and it's wabi-sabi, which is a Japanese, and it's learning to accept the incomplete, the imperfect, and the impermanent. I'm grateful for having been born at the time that I was born, to the parents I was blessed with. Not everyone says, or not everyone means that, but I really do. I was blessed. They were somewhat older. I think that may have helped. Grateful for having met 2 great guys and got married, for having mostly a healthy family, for living at Foxdale, and also that I had interesting jobs and interesting hobbies to keep my mind going. This collage shows members of my family wearing the same baptismal dress. We start with my mother, and she was born in 1897. My father was slightly younger. Yes, that is my father, because they wore dresses until quite a bit later in their life. He was born in 1904. And then as the dress got more fragile, we literally put the babies in the dress, took their picture, and took it off of them. And this is my daughter Beth's 2 children, Lorek and William.